The gavel hit the wooden table so hard, the echo rattled the chandelier above. Everyone in the HOA meeting room froze. The woman at the center, Karen Wilkins, leaned forward with a smug grin that could curdle milk. "It is the unanimous decision of the Homeowners Association," she announced in a voice that made you feel like you just stepped on her carpet with muddy boots, "that the Miller family is hereby banned from the community." Gasps erupted from every corner of the room. My mom's face went pale. My little brother squeezed my arm like he was holding on for dear life. And Dad? Dad didn't say a word. He just stared at her. A stare so cold it made Karen shift uncomfortably in her seat. But she pushed on. "Effective immediately," she continued, "your property is to be vacated in 30 days. This is for the good of the neighborhood. We won't have people like you ruining our reputation." My mind spun. People like us? What did that even mean? Dad's jaw tightened. His voice, when it finally came, was low but sharp enough to slice through the tension. "Karen, you've made a mistake." She smirked, brushing him off. "The only mistake here was letting you people in." The room went quiet. Dad stood, towering over the table, and in that moment, something in his eyes told me this wasn't going to end like Karen thought. Because Dad wasn't just any man. And Karen had no idea that the power she thought she had was about to vanish. What happened next shocked everyone so badly, half the HOA forgot to breathe. It all started 6 months ago, before the meetings, before the threats, before the chaos. Back then, we were just happy to move into the little white house on Sycamore Lane. Mom loved the wraparound porch. My brother, Tyler, was obsessed with the giant oak tree in the backyard. And me? I just loved that we finally had a place with a little space, away from the constant noise of the city. The first few weeks were peaceful. Neighbors waved when they passed by, some brought over pies or cookies. There was a retired couple next door, the Hendersons, who would drop by just to chat. And then there was Karen. Karen didn't introduce herself with a pie or cookies. She came over with a clipboard. "I'm the president of the HOA," she said without smiling. "We have rules here." She handed Mom a packet thick enough to be a phone book. Lawn height, fence color, where you can park your car, even what curtains you can hang in the front windows, it was all in there. Mom, being Mom, just thanked her politely and promised to read it. Dad wasn't so polite when he flipped through it later. "This isn't a neighborhood," he muttered. "It's a dictatorship." At first, we followed the rules as best we could. But Karen had a way of showing up at the worst times, finding tiny violations no normal person would notice. A hose left out for an hour. The trash bin not tucked far enough behind the fence. A basketball hoop in the driveway that Tyler had only used once. One day, she left a bright pink notice taped to our door because Mom had planted tulips in the front yard. Apparently, only roses were approved flora. Mom tried to laugh it off, but I saw the way her smile faded every time Karen walked up our driveway. Dad's patience was wearing thin, but he didn't lash out. Not yet. Then came the barbecue incident. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon. Dad had the grill going, the smell of burgers and ribs filling the air. We'd invited a few neighbors, including the Hendersons and the Garcia family from down the street. Kids were playing tag on the lawn. Everyone was having a good time, until Karen showed up. She marched straight into the yard like she owned it. "This is an unsanctioned gathering," she announced. HOA policy requires written approval for any event with more than 8 people. Dad set down the tongs and stared at her. "We're having a cookout, Karen. Not a rock concert." "It doesn't matter. You're in violation." She started jotting notes on her clipboard, muttering about fines and warnings. The mood died instantly. Guests started making excuses to leave, embarrassed. Mom tried to smooth things over, but Karen just smirked as she walked away. That night, Dad didn't eat much. He just sat at the kitchen table, tapping his fingers against the wood. I could tell he was thinking. Things got quieter after that, but not in a good way. Every week, another letter from the HOA. Another violation. Another fine. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, Karen escalated. She called a special HOA meeting. We weren't told the reason until we arrived. The room was packed, neighbors, board members, Karen at the head table like some queen holding court. And that's when she said it. That is why, after reviewing the conduct of the Miller family, this board has voted to remove them from our community. Mom gasped. Tyler's eyes went wide. My stomach dropped. And Dad? Dad stood up, slow and steady, and said something I'll never forget. Karen, you might run this HOA. But I run this county. Karen froze. The room erupted in whispers. And then Karen blinked, like she was trying to figure out if she'd just heard him right. You run this county, she said with a little laugh, glancing at the rest of the board. Dad didn't smile. He just reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small leather folder. When he flipped it open, there it was, his official badge and credentials. My jaw nearly hit the floor. The room went silent except for the faint squeak of Karen's chair as she shifted back. I'm the county commissioner, Dad said, his voice calm but carrying enough weight to make even the most stubborn person shut up. And you've just threatened to remove my family from our own property without cause. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few people covered their mouths. Others turned to each other, whispering furiously. Karen's smirk faltered, but she still tried to recover. This is about following the rules, she snapped. Even you. Even me. Dad cut in, his eyes locking onto hers. Karen, the only rules that matter here are the ones written in the county charter. And I know for a fact, you've been breaking a lot of them. You could almost see the blood drain from her face. For the first time since we'd moved in, Karen didn't have something snappy to say. She just sat there, gripping her pen like it was the only thing keeping her upright. But before Dad could push further, one of the board members, a short man with glasses, jumped up. We don't have to listen to this, he barked. You're just trying to intimidate us because you've been caught violating. Dad turned to him slowly. Careful. You're under oath at these meetings. You lie, and it becomes a legal matter. That shut him right up. Mom reached over and touched Dad's arm, whispering something I couldn't hear. His jaw unclenched slightly, and he took a slow breath. We're going to handle this the right way, he said, looking around the room. I'll be reviewing every action this HOA has taken in the past 5 years. Every fine. Every eviction. Every policy that's not in line with county law. And if I find you've overstepped, he let the sentence hang, and the silence that followed was heavy enough to crush you. Karen shifted again, but this time her eyes darted to the door. Then, just when I thought the tension couldn't get any higher, the door flew open. A man in a dark suit and sunglasses stepped in, holding a thick folder. He walked straight to Dad and handed it over without a word. Dad opened it, glanced inside, and nodded. Karen, he said, closing the folder with a snap, you and your board need to step outside with me. Right now. Karen laughed nervously. We're in the middle of a meeting. Dad cut her off. No. You're in the middle of an investigation. The room went dead silent again. Karen's hand trembled slightly as she set down her pen. The other board members looked like they'd just realized they'd been standing on thin ice this whole time. Karen slowly rose from her seat, her face pale, and followed Dad toward the door. The others trailed after them. The man in the suit closed the door behind them, leaving me, Mom, Tyler, and the rest of the neighbors sitting in stunned silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. What was in that folder? What investigation was Dad talking about? Then, about 10 minutes later, the door slammed open again, this time so hard it hit the wall. Dad walked back in, his eyes blazing. And behind him, Karen wasn't there. Neither were half the board members. He picked up the gavel from the table and set it down in front of Mom. "Congratulations," he said. "You're the new president of the HOA." The room erupted. But before I could even process what had just happened, Dad turned to me and Tyler and said, "We're not done yet. This is just the start." And then, Dad's words hung in the air like thunder that hadn't yet rolled away. Just the start wasn't something he said lightly, and I could see from the look in his eyes that he meant every syllable. Mom was still trying to understand what had just happened. One minute she was sitting quietly at a meeting, the next she was holding the HOA's gavel. The neighbors were buzzing like bees in a jar, throwing questions at Dad, congratulating Mom, and trying to make sense of Karen's sudden disappearance. But Dad wasn't basking in the chaos. He stood there scanning the room, his mind somewhere else entirely. When the chatter died down enough, he cleared his throat. "Folks," he said, his voice steady, "you've been under the control of an HOA that's been breaking laws, abusing authority, and scaring people into silence. That ends tonight. But there's something bigger at play here, something you all need to know." People shifted in their seats. The Hendersons leaned forward. Mr. Garcia crossed his arms, eyebrows raised. "Karen didn't just make up those fines and threats," Dad continued. "She's been working with developers outside this neighborhood. Selling off rights to your land, inflating violations, pushing families out so their property can be flipped. And it's not just here, it's happening in other communities too." A collective gasp filled the room. One woman in the back shook her head like she couldn't believe it. Another man muttered, "I knew it." "I've got the proof," Dad said, patting the folder the man in the suit had brought. "And that means I have the authority to shut down this HOA, not just fire a few people." Mom's eyes widened. "Wait, shut it down?" "Yes," Dad said simply. "And if what I find in the next 48 hours is as bad as I think it is, I won't just dissolve this HOA. I'll ban every member of its board from holding any housing authority position in the entire county." That statement landed like a hammer. People turned to each other in shock. Some were smiling, others just stunned into silence. Tyler whispered to me, "Does that mean Karen can't boss anyone around anymore?" "If Dad does what he says," I whispered back, "Karen won't even be allowed to boss her own cat around." But before Dad could keep explaining, the door to the meeting hall burst open again, this time revealing Karen. She was flushed, breathing hard, and clutching a crumpled sheet of paper. "You think you can just walk in here and destroy everything I've built?" she shouted, her voice cracking. A few people gasped at her tone, but Dad just stood calmly, watching her like he'd been expecting her to come back. "I've got connections," Karen hissed. "You think your county badge scares me? I'll go higher than you. I'll go to the state." "You do that," Dad said evenly. "And I'll go to the federal level. We'll see who runs out of allies first." Karen's eyes darted around the room, but instead of support, she found only cold stares from neighbors who were finally seeing her for what she was. She took a shaky breath and looked back at Dad. "You don't know what you're starting," she whispered. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm starting," Dad replied. She crumpled the paper in her hand and threw it to the floor, then stormed out again, slamming the door so hard a few picture frames rattled on the walls. For a moment, no one said a word. Then Dad turned to Mom. "I need your help with something tonight," he said. "Something that might change everything." Mom frowned. "Tonight?" "Yes," he said firmly. "Because by tomorrow morning, I plan to have every bit of Karen's operation exposed." And just as he said that, the man in the suit reappeared at the door. This time, his face was pale. He leaned toward Dad and whispered something I couldn't hear. But whatever it was, it made Dad's jaw clench tight. Then Dad looked straight at Mom and said, "Change of plans. We've got trouble." And then, the weight in Dad's voice made my stomach twist. Whatever the man in the suit had just told him wasn't small. "What kind of trouble?" Mom asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dad didn't answer right away. He glanced around the room, then motioned for everyone to stay seated. "Nobody leaves until I'm back," he said. "This concerns all of you." Then he turned to the man in the suit. "Show me." The two of them stepped outside. The door swung shut behind them, and the sound of their low voices was muffled. The rest of us sat in uneasy silence, the air thick with questions we didn't dare ask out loud. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting Karen to come storming back in again. Tyler tapped his foot nervously, whispering, "What do you think it is? Did she, do something bad?" I gave him a look. "Tyler, she's already done bad stuff. The real question is how bad this new thing is." Mom didn't speak. She just stared at the table, gripping the gavel like it was the only thing keeping her steady. 5 minutes later, the door opened again, and Dad walked back in. The man in the suit was gone. Dad's face was unreadable, but his eyes burned with that same fire I'd seen earlier. "Everyone," he said, "we have a situation. Karen isn't acting alone. She's got backing from a group of developers who've been targeting multiple neighborhoods across the county. They're using the HOA as a tool to pressure homeowners into selling, then flipping the properties for profit. It's bigger than we thought." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. The Hendersons exchanged wide-eyed glances. "They're planning to take over this entire neighborhood within 3 months, Dad continued. And they've already started moving money in ways that, well, let's just say they wouldn't want the IRS to know about." A man in the back stood up. "So what do we do? Do we call the police?" Dad shook his head. "The police can't stop a financial takeover. This has to be done legally, surgically, and fast. We cut off their ability to operate here, and we make sure they can't touch another community in the county." He turned to Mom. "We'll need the HOA's records. Everything, minutes, financial statements, violation notices. Tonight." Mom hesitated. "I don't even know where they keep them." Dad smiled faintly. "I do." And that's when he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a keyring, not just any keyring, but one with a long, flat brass key that looked like it belonged to some old vault. "Where did you get that?" I asked. "From a storage facility Karen's been using under a different name," he said. "Inside is everything we need to shut her down, and take her friends with her." The room fell into stunned silence again. But before anyone could react further, there was a loud bang against the side of the building, so loud it made the windows rattle. Everyone jumped. Dad's head snapped toward the sound, his expression instantly changing from calm to sharp alertness. He motioned for everyone to stay back and move toward the door. "Stay here," he said. "Lock it behind me." Mom was about to protest when another bang echoed, this time closer, like it was right outside the meeting hall's front door. I felt my pulse spike. Tyler clung to my arm. Dad reached the door, turned the handle slowly, and stepped outside into the dark. The door shut. And then, a sharp crack split the night, followed by the sound of something metallic hitting the ground. Everyone inside the hall froze. Mom's hand went to her mouth. Tyler's grip on my arm tightened until it hurt. Through the thin walls, we could hear muffled voices, angry, low, and hurried. One of them was Dad's, firm and commanding. The others, I didn't recognize. I moved toward the window, careful not to make noise. Peeking through the blinds, I saw shadows shifting under the yellow glow of the parking lot lights. 3 men stood near the side of the building, all dressed in dark jackets. One had a crowbar. Another was holding what looked like a camera bag, but from the way he cradled it, I knew it wasn't a camera inside. Dad was standing between them and the hall door, his posture solid, like he wasn't about to give an inch. The man in the crowbar's hand took a step forward, saying something too low for me to catch. Dad's voice cut through the air, louder this time. "This is county property tonight. I suggest you leave before I add trespassing to your list of charges." The men didn't move. One of them, tall, with a shaved head, pointed at Dad. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Dad took a slow step forward. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. And I know who's paying you to be here." The tall man smirked, but I saw his hand twitch. The kind of twitch that meant he was deciding between running or doing something stupid. Inside, Mom was whispering to the neighbors to stay calm. The Hendersons moved closer to the back of the room. Mr. Garcia positioned himself by the door, just in case. Outside, the standoff stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Then, without warning, the man with the crowbar swung it, not at Dad, but at the side of the building, smashing one of the security lights. The parking lot plunged halfway into shadow. That's when Dad moved. Faster than I'd ever seen him, he grabbed the crowbar mid-swing, yanked it free, and tossed it across the lot. The metal clanged loudly as it hit the asphalt. The other 2 men stepped back, startled. "This is your last chance," Dad said, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. "Go tell Karen her game is over. And tell her friends they've just made this personal." For a moment, nobody moved. Then the tall man muttered something under his breath, turned, and walked off into the shadows. The other 2 followed. Dad watched until they were out of sight, then came back inside, locking the door behind him. "They were trying to destroy the records before we could get to them," he said, scanning the room. "We move now." Mom stood. "Now? It's almost midnight." "That's why now," Dad replied. "Less chance they'll see us coming." He pointed to me, Tyler, and Mr. Garcia. "You're coming with me. The rest of you, stay here, keep the lights off, and don't open this door for anyone but me." Tyler's eyes went wide. "Wait, where are we going?" Dad grabbed the brass key from his pocket, its surface glinting under the dim light. "To the storage unit," he said. "We're getting everything before they try again." We didn't waste time. Within minutes, we were piled into Dad's truck, the tires crunching over gravel as we pulled out of the lot. The roads were nearly empty, just the glow of streetlights sliding past the windows. The ride was tense. No one spoke much, except for Dad giving quick instructions. "When we get there, stay behind me. If you see anyone, don't engage, just let me handle it." We finally turned onto a narrow road lined with chain-link fences. At the end sat a squat concrete building with rows of storage units, their doors painted dull red. A single street lamp flickered near the gate, casting long, nervous shadows. Dad parked, killed the engine, and we all got out. The air was cold and smelled faintly of rain. He led us to one of the units halfway down the row, the brass key clinking in his hand. He slid it into the lock. Turned it. The heavy door rolled upward with a screech of metal. And there, stacked neatly inside, were dozens of boxes, file cabinets, and a small safe. Dad stepped forward, but before he could touch anything, a voice came from the shadows. "You're too late." The voice sent a shiver down my spine. It was low, cold, and full of something that made every instinct in me scream danger. From behind the rows of storage units, a figure stepped into the thin light, Karen. Her perfect hair was a mess, and her eyes burned with something between rage and desperation. Behind her, 2 of the same men from earlier emerged, the tall one and the shaved-head one, both holding black duffel bags that sagged heavily at the sides. "I told you," Karen said, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "you don't know what you're starting." Dad didn't flinch. He stepped in front of us, his presence filling the narrow alley between the storage units. "And I told you, Karen, you've already lost." She laughed, but it was hollow. "Lost? Oh no. I still have enough in here to ruin every single person in that neighborhood, and a few of your county friends while I'm at it." She motioned toward the duffel bags. "Proof. Videos. Bank transfers. People will fall with me." Dad's eyes locked on hers. "Then I'll make sure you're the first to hit the ground." The tall man shifted uneasily, his grip tightening on the bag. Karen noticed and snapped, "Don't you dare back out now. You're in this as deep as I am." Dad took a slow step forward, his voice dropping to that tone I'd only heard when he meant business, the kind that could freeze someone in place. "Karen, put the bags down and walk away. You're standing on county property, in possession of stolen records, and I've already called in backup." Her smile twitched. "Bluff." That's when the sudden wail of sirens cut through the night, bouncing off the metal doors. Red and blue lights flooded the narrow lane as 3 sheriff's SUVs slid to a stop at the end of the row. Deputies jumped out, weapons drawn but pointed low. Karen's bravado cracked like thin ice. The tall man dropped his bag with a thud. The shaved-head man swore under his breath and took a step back. 2 deputies moved in, cuffing them before they had a chance to run. Karen tried to pull away when they reached for her, spitting out, "You can't do this. I have rights." Dad's voice was steady. "You had rights. You used them to hurt people. That ends now." The deputies hauled her toward one of the SUVs, but she twisted to glare at Dad one last time. "You think you've won? You'll see, this county isn't as clean as you think." Dad just looked at her calmly. "It will be." Within minutes, the duffel bags were secured in the back of a patrol car, along with every box and cabinet from the unit. Dad signed a few papers, handed over the brass key, and the deputies took control of the scene. As we stood there under the flickering streetlight, the tension finally began to drain from my chest. Tyler let out a breath he'd probably been holding for half an hour. Mr. Garcia clapped Dad on the shoulder. "You just saved all of us," he said quietly. Dad didn't smile. He just looked out toward the highway where the patrol cars were disappearing into the distance. "No," he said. "We just made sure this doesn't happen again." By sunrise, word had spread across the neighborhood. Karen and her cronies weren't just out of the HOA, they were barred from holding any housing authority position anywhere in the county. Every unlawful fine was rescinded. Every stolen property case was reopened. The neighbors gathered in front of our house that evening, bringing food, music, and laughter. For the first time since we'd moved in, the place felt alive, not controlled. Mom stood beside Dad on the porch, smiling as she looked over the crowd. Tyler ran through the yard with the Hendersons' grandkids. And me? I just leaned on the railing, watching the people who had been afraid days ago now standing tall and free. As the sun dipped low, Dad raised a glass of lemonade. "Here's to living without fear," he said. The cheer that followed rolled down Sycamore Lane like a wave. And just like that, the HOA that once ruled everything was gone, replaced by a community that finally belonged to itself. Karen had tried to ban my family. Instead, Dad banned her from the county.